All right, we're going to do a little bit of math now for refraction of light. We're going to work with both the index of refraction equation as well as the Snell's law equation. Our first examples here are going to be over the index of refraction formula. So our first question says, what is the speed of light in a material with a refractive index of 2.00? So first thing we're going to do is just list our givens. They gave us an index of refraction, so remember that is the variable n. And this is a value of 2 or 2.00. Notice that the index does not have a unit here, and I'll address that again here in just a moment. Now, when it's asking you for the speed of light, you need to be very careful in understanding what the situation is. This is not asking me for the speed of light, as in c, which we would know is 3 times 10 to the 8th. Instead, it's asking for the speed of the light in a specific material. So they are actually asking me for the letter V, velocity, for the speed through a specific medium. We are going to need to use the C value of 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. And again, you can write that as 3.0 times 10 to the 8th if you'd prefer. So my equation here is N equals C over V. And so I'm going to plug in my numbers. 2 is equal to 3 times 10 to the 8th over V. So here is my formula with the substitution. So now I need to be able to do my algebra here, and so I'm going to choose to just go ahead and use that shortcut. Ideally, your ability to do the formulas and algebra steps properly is strong enough that we can just kind of skip right to this. And so this is going to give us a value of 1.5 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Now, if we go back and we look at our givens, they only gave us one variable, and it was measured with 3 significant figures. And so I have here my final answer is 1.50 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Our second question says that we have light that travels through a medium at 1.97 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. What is the index of the medium, and what type of medium is this? So in this question, they've given me the velocity of 1.97 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. And they are asking me for the n value. What is the index? So my equation, once again, is n equals c over v. So I am going to say n equals 3 times 10 to the 8th over 1.97 times 10 to the 8th. And so when I put that in my calculator, that is going to give me a value of 1.5228 blah, blah, blah. Okay, so my final answer here, once again, should have 3 significant figures based on what was given to me. And so here I have my final answer written as n equals 1.52. But I want to pause for a moment. I want us to look at the fact that there is no unit here. I said I'd come back to that, so let's look at that real quick. When we are looking at the values that we have plugged in, we have our numerator of 3 times 10 to the 8th. That is in meters per second. We have our denominator of 1.97 times 10 to the 8th. That is also meters per second. So when we do the algebra here, we are going to have a numerator of meters per second divided by a denominator of meters per second. So the units cancel itself out. So we just are left with an n value. How are you supposed to know which type of material it is? Remember, in the notes, I provided you a list of a list of n values. So we had a value of 1.52, and so from the list that I gave you, we would be able to identify that as crown glass. Again, you are not expected to memorize that list, but you will need to reference it for some of your practice work. So crown glass is the answer to the second question on this page. All right, let's go ahead and do our next examples. So here it says that we have a red laser beam and it travels from air into glass. The angle of incidence is 40 degrees and the angle of refraction is 23.4 degrees. What is the refractive index of the glass? Word problems that you guys get on your practice work, quiz, and test, they'll have that degree symbol. It's just a programming issue here, so sorry about that. Okay, here's what I want to point out. We have two materials. Material number one is going to be air. It goes from air into glass. So my N value for my first material is 1, and that's a number we're supposed to know for air. The angle of incidence. So my incident angle is the original input angle, and that's always going to be theta 1. So you can use that to help you for reading future questions. Now my second material was glass. So it's going from air into glass. So this is material 2. So the N value, what is the refractive index of the glass? That's actually what I'm looking for. So N2 becomes my unknown. And then it says that they want me to use an angle of refraction. So refraction is after it has bent because it has changed material. So that is going to tell me that this angle is specifically angle 2 because this is in the second material, which is why the angle changed. Okay, so there's my list of givens. My equation says that I'm going to take N1 sine theta 1 equals N2 sine theta 2. And so we substitute our numbers in. 1 times the sine of 40. Make sure your calculators are in degree mode. Equals N2 times the sine of 23.4. So in order to complete my algebra here, I am going to divide by the sine of 23.4, divide by the sine of 23.4. And so I'm going to choose to now grab my calculator. And if I'm putting this in my calculator, I am going to open a parenthesis. I'm going to say 1 times, make sure you hit the sine function. It's going to ask you for your number, input your 40, close your parenthesis for your numerator. Then say divided by, hit the sine button, put in your 23.4. And so when I do that, the sine of 20 divided by the sine of 23.4 gives me a value of 1.6185, blah, blah, blah. So we look back at our givens, and we're going to say N2 has a value of 1.62. All right, let's do one last question here. We have... Oh, let me move this out of the way. We have another question that says that we have a light that's traveling from a diamond into glass, and it gave us the angle of incidence. So this is going to be my N1 value. The angle of incidence, the angle, that's going to be my theta. I'm going to have a theta of 6.3 degrees. And again, it'll say degrees more clearly on your paper. What is the angle of refraction? So it's asking me for an angle, and because it's refraction, that makes it theta 2, and so that becomes my unknown. If the index of the diamond is 2.4, so our light is going from the diamond into the glass. So this means that the diamond is material 1 and the glass is material 2. So when it tells me the refractive index of the diamond, they're just telling me the N value. And diamond is object 1. So that's going to be N1 of 2.4. The refractive index of the glass, we've identified that as material 2, so N2 is going to be 1.5. So my equation is N1 sine theta 1 is equal to n2 sine theta 2. And so we're going to say 2.4 times the sine of 6.3 is equal to 1.5 times the sine of theta 2. Okay, so my algebra here says I am going to divide by 1.5. So I'm going to choose to now take my calculator. Once again, I'm going to open my parenthesis, and I'm going to tell my calculator I want you to do 2.4 times the sine of 6.3, close the parenthesis for my numerator. So you see you might need a double parenthesis there. Then I'm going to divide by my value of 1.5. And so this is going to give me a number of 0.17557. Now this is equal to the sine theta 2. So here's the deal. You cannot divide by sine. If you try to say divide and then hit your sine button in your calculator, it's going to give you an error. Instead of dividing by sine, what we're going to do instead is we are going to multiply by the inverse sine. So in your calculator, the second function of the sine button is going to be your inverse sine. So you're going to hit that button first. What that's going to do in my algebra, it's going to cancel out the sine and the inverse sine, and so I'm just going to be left with theta 2. And then in my calculator, when I hit the inverse sine button, it's going to give me an open parentheses, and so this answer is going to go right in there. That's how it's going to look in my calculator. So use that answer button so that it copies all of those decimals. And so in this case, I get 10.1121 blah, blah, blah equals theta 2. So again, we're going to look at the number of sig figs. This time, there were only 2 sig figs. So my final answer is that theta 2 is going to be 10 degrees. And again, we're going to just let that end in a 0. That's just the way it rounded, and so you won't be penalized for that.